Mom, don't come today. I paused at the door, suitcase in hand. Why, baby? It's a private honeymoon trip. My smile didn't fade because those tickets he booked, they were in my name, and his new wife's name, missing entirely. Sometimes God doesn't need thunder to deliver justice, just timing. Tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more true stories that hit the heart. I had just finished ironing my light blue church dress, the one I save for special days, when the phone rang. The morning sunlight was spilling through the blinds, cutting long, golden stripes across my living room floor. My suitcase sat by the door, packed and ready. Inside it were my favorite sandals, a sun hat I hadn't worn in years, and the travel folder I'd kept in my purse ever since I booked those flights. I smiled when I saw my son's name flashing on the screen. Marcus, my baby. 35 years old and still, in my heart, the little boy who used to call me at work just to say he missed me. I answered the call with a joy I didn't even try to hide. Morning, baby. You at the airport already? I'm heading out in 10 minutes. There was a pause, just long enough to let something uneasy slip into the room. I could hear movement in the background, a woman's laughter, muffled, unfamiliar. Then Marcus cleared his throat. Mom, he said slowly, like each word was heavier than the next. Don't come today. I froze, the iron still humming softly behind me. What you mean, don't come today? The flight's at 11. I got the tickets printed and everything. He hesitated again. Then he exhaled. It's a private honeymoon trip. Jasmine and I want to start our marriage right. Just the two of us. No family this time. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was thick, like air after a thunderstorm when you can smell the lightning that already passed through. I felt the words hit, slow and sharp. Private honeymoon, he'd said. I swallowed hard, keeping my voice calm. Oh, I said, just that. Private, huh? He started rambling. It's not that we don't want you there, Mom. It's just, it's a couple thing. We'll do a family trip later, I promise. But promises mean nothing when you can already hear the goodbye behind them. I pressed my lips together, staring at the purse I'd packed so carefully. The same one with their passports and tickets, the ones I'd booked myself with my airline miles and savings. All right, baby, I said quietly. Y'all enjoy yourselves. He sounded relieved. Thanks, Mom. You understand. But he didn't know what I understood. I hung up. For a long moment, I just stood there, the phone still in my hand, hearing the faint echo of his voice fade out of the line. The iron clicked off behind me, its heat fading, and the house fell into that deep stillness that only comes when something inside you finally snaps into clarity. I sat down on the edge of the sofa, staring at the suitcase by the door. All the excitement I'd been holding on to, gone, replaced by something else, something quieter, colder, but clearer than anything I'd felt in years. The tickets. That thought came like a whisper from somewhere deep in my memory. The travel folder was still in my purse. When Marcus and Jasmine asked me to handle the flights, they said, "You've got all the points, Mama. You're the travel expert." They laughed, and I laughed with them, happy to be needed. I booked everything: the hotel, the flights, the transfers. I even printed the confirmation and slipped it neatly into a folder labeled Honeymoon Itinerary. Now my hands were trembling as I unzipped the purse and slid the papers out. The airline logo gleamed at the top, the words neat and official. Passenger 1, Evelyn Williams. Passenger 2, Evelyn Williams. My breath caught. I checked again to be sure. Both tickets were in my name. I almost laughed right then and there. I had booked them using my account, and Marcus never even bothered to change the details. So this private honeymoon they were off to, they'd be needing me to board that plane. I leaned back against the sofa, the paper trembling in my hands. The irony was so sharp it almost tasted sweet. All these years of being the dependable one, the fixer, the payee. And now, finally, the universe had given me a receipt. Still, I didn't rush to react. I just sat there and thought about everything that had led to this moment. I thought about Marcus as a little boy, how I'd hold him close after his nightmares when thunder made him cry. I thought about all the mornings I left the house before sunrise, my nurse's uniform freshly pressed, just to make sure he had a better life than I did. I worked 2 jobs when his father passed away, ate oatmeal for dinner, and smiled through exhaustion. And when Jasmine came into his life, I did what mothers do. I opened my arms. I helped them pay their rent that first year. I gave Jasmine my old pearl earrings for the wedding, and I even put down the deposit for their reception hall when they were a little short. Every time they said thank you, I told myself it meant love. Maybe it was just gratitude. Maybe it was just convenience. The wedding had been small, rushed, but I didn't mind. What mattered was my son's happiness. Or so I thought. Now, sitting there, holding the evidence of their carelessness, I saw things differently. It wasn't just about a trip. It was about being erased. Quietly, politely, like old wallpaper covered up by new paint. I walked over to the window, watching the neighbor kids ride their bikes in circles, laughing freely in the street. Somewhere deep inside, I felt a strange kind of calm. I went to the kitchen, poured myself a cup of coffee, and stared at the travel folder again. My name, my trip, my money. A thought began to bloom slowly, softly, like the first petal of a stubborn flower pushing through concrete. I whispered it out loud. Maybe I'll just take the trip myself. The sound of those words startled me, not because they were bold, but because they felt right. For the first time in a long time, something was about me. I walked back to the suitcase and zipped it shut. It was already packed after all. I slipped the tickets back into my purse and took one last look at the house. No anger, no tears, just quiet satisfaction. Marcus thought he'd excluded me. He thought I'd stay home, hurt and forgotten. But the truth was, that plane couldn't leave without me, and I wasn't about to miss my own flight. When Marcus was born, the doctor laid him on my chest and said, "He's got your eyes." Even now, all these years later, I still remember that moment like it's pressed into my skin. His tiny hand gripping my finger, his breath soft and uneven, my heart whispering, "This one, Evelyn, this one's your reason to keep going." I raised that boy alone, worked 16-hour days at the county hospital, came home to a baby who'd already fallen asleep in his crib, and still found enough strength to kiss his forehead goodnight. Back then, everything I did had his name on it. The double shifts, the savings account, the sacrifices. Every ache in my back had a purpose. When he was 10, I bought him a bicycle with money I was supposed to spend on a new washing machine. When he was 16, I took out a small loan so he could go on that school trip to D.C. to see history, like he said. When he was 18, I cried through the whole graduation ceremony. Not because of pride alone, but because I knew every step he took across that stage was one I had paid for with sleepless nights and tired bones. Marcus was a good boy back then, polite, funny, always quick to hug me before heading out. Even after college, when he got his first job, he used to call every Sunday morning just to check on me. "You eat, Mama?" "Yes, baby." "You resting like the doctor told you?" "Trying to." He'd laugh. "Trying don't count." Those were the years I thought I'd done something right. I used to sit at the kitchen table, look at his old report cards, his college letters, his photos, and think, I did it, Robert. Our boy made it. But things changed after he met Jasmine. The first time I met her, I was standing by my stove, stirring greens. She came into my kitchen wearing high heels and perfume so strong it made the curtains smell like lilacs for a week. Pretty girl, no doubt about it. Tall, long nails, sharp smile. But there was something in her eyes that didn't sit right. Cold, like glass that's been polished too much. "Hello, Mrs. Williams," she said, offering her hand like she was introducing herself to a stranger. "Evelyn is fine, baby," I told her, wiping my hands on a towel before shaking hers. "You can call me Mama if you want." She smiled, polite, thin. "I'll stick with Evelyn." That was the first crack. Small but deep. From then on, every visit felt a little more distant. Marcus started calling less, visiting less, always with excuses. Work's been crazy. We're just trying to get settled. Jasmine's not feeling well. But whenever they needed something, my phone lit up. Rent money, new furniture, groceries, medical bills. I always said yes. I thought that was love. I thought saying yes would keep us close. Then came the wedding. I offered to help plan it, to make it special. I even offered them my backyard. Jasmine said, "We'll handle it." She didn't mean we. She meant me excluded. They picked a small venue on the other side of town. I gave them money anyway, $5,000 I'd saved from my retirement fund. "For your future," I said. They thanked me with smiles that didn't reach their eyes. And now, standing here, realizing he tried to take a honeymoon trip behind my back using tickets I bought, I understood something I hadn't before. The woman I raised was gone. Or maybe she'd never existed. My Marcus had turned into someone I didn't recognize, but I didn't hate him. Not yet. You don't stop loving your child just because they hurt you. You just start loving them differently. From a distance, through the ache. Still, I couldn't pretend I didn't see it. He'd changed. And Jasmine, she'd perfected the art of steering him. She was the kind of woman who smiled while counting what was yours. The kind who said family when she meant resources. I remember the last time they'd visited before the wedding. Marcus sat in my kitchen, his hand in Jasmine's, both of them looking too serious for a casual talk. "Mama, you got a travel card, right?" "I do. Why?" "We were thinking, since you have the points and all, you could book our honeymoon flights. I'll pay you back next month." I didn't hesitate. "Of course, baby." That was my mistake. Now, as I stared at the travel folder, it all came together like puzzle pieces I'd been too blind to see. They'd used me, the same way people use kindness as currency. Still, there was one thing they hadn't counted on: my memory. See, people forget that older women remember everything. The things we do quietly, the checks, the favors, the meals, the sleepless nights. They build a ledger in our hearts. And one day, when the debt comes due, we settle it in silence. I sat at the kitchen table, running my fingers over the tickets again. The name printed there, Evelyn Williams, looked like both a signature and a warning. I thought about calling him back, telling him I knew, but no, that would give him the chance to lie again. I wanted him to feel the weight of his choices, to reach that airport desk and realize that his mother, the woman he'd brushed aside, was the only one whose name could make that plane leave the ground. Somewhere deep in my chest, beneath the ache, something shifted. It wasn't revenge exactly, more like justice stretching its back after a long sleep. I poured myself another cup of coffee, sweetened it with too much sugar, and took a long sip. The bitterness felt right. "I raised you better than this," I whispered to the empty kitchen. "But maybe you gotta learn it the hard way." Outside, the morning had turned bright, the kind of bright that feels almost cruel when your heart's heavy. I watched a bird land on the porch rail, tilt its head, and fly off again. Free. And I thought, maybe it's time I learned to do the same. Because the truth was, I hadn't just raised Marcus. I'd raised myself too. Out of poverty, out of grief, out of loneliness. I could do it again, this time out of disappointment. I folded the travel folder neatly, placed it back into my purse, and smiled. It wasn't the warm smile of a proud mother. It was smaller, sharper, and new. The woman who used to give without thinking had just disappeared, and someone stronger had taken her place. There's a kind of disrespect that doesn't arrive shouting. It sneaks in through the cracks, dressed up like care. That's how it happened with Marcus and Jasmine. Nothing loud, nothing you could point to and say there. That's when it started. Just small moments that chipped away at the respect between us, one soft word and fake smile at a time. It began the week after their wedding. I'd offered to host a family dinner, something warm and home-cooked to celebrate them properly. I made baked chicken, sweet potatoes, and collard greens. Marcus's favorites since he was little. I set the table with my good china, the ones I only brought out for birthdays and Christmas. But when they arrived, Jasmine wrinkled her nose like the air smelled wrong. "Oh," she said, glancing around, "you didn't have to go to all this trouble." "Not thank you, not it looks beautiful. Just that, like my effort was an inconvenience." Marcus noticed, but didn't say a word. He just patted my shoulder, gave me that smile that didn't reach his eyes anymore, and said, "You know how she is, Mom." I knew exactly how she was. Polite in public, dismissive in private. She sat at my table picking at her food, texting under her napkin, while Marcus told me about his new job. "We're thinking about getting a new car," he said. "Something reliable. Maybe an SUV." I nodded. "You deserve it, baby. You've been working hard." Jasmine didn't even look up. "We just need a little help for the down payment," she murmured. There it was. The real reason for the visit. I laughed softly. "How much help we talking?" "About?" Marcus leaned back, casual. "Maybe 3,000, just until we get the bonuses from work." I remember feeling that old reflex, that mix of pride and duty, rise up in me. My son needed me. My boy, who used to ride his bike around the block calling, "Watch me, Mama." I said yes. Of course I said yes. That night I wrote the check. They hugged me at the door and said, "We'll pay you back. But you can't repay what you don't respect." Over the months it became routine. Phone calls that started with small talk and ended with numbers. The landlord's on us again. The insurance came up higher than we thought. "We'll get you next month." I didn't mind at first. I told myself this was what mothers did, keep their children from drowning. But somewhere along the way, I realized Marcus wasn't trying to swim anymore. He was comfortable letting me carry the current. The first time I saw his new watch, gold, thick, expensive, I didn't say anything. The second time, when he showed up with new shoes while I was clipping coupons at the table, I almost did, but I swallowed the words. I didn't want to fight. I just wanted my son to love me like he used to. Then, one afternoon, Jasmine called. "Evelyn, could you send the rent money early this month?" "Early?" I asked. "That's a whole week ahead." "Yeah, well, the landlord's being difficult. You know how these people are." These people. She said it like she wasn't talking about herself, too. A tenant who'd never paid rent on her own. I sighed, transferred the money, and told myself it wasn't worth an argument. But when I hung up, I sat there for a long time staring at the confirmation screen, realizing I hadn't heard a thank you in months. It was around that time Marcus stopped calling me Mom. It turned into Ma, short and clipped, like he couldn't spare the full word anymore. "Ma, can you send it now?" "Ma, I'll explain later." "Ma, Jasmine said you promised." Each time he said it, it chipped away at something that used to be whole. I remember one evening standing in my kitchen with the phone to my ear, hearing Jasmine in the background saying, "Ask her, she'll say yes. Ask her, she'll say yes." Like I was a vending machine for kindness. Push the right buttons, get what you want. I wanted to believe it wasn't manipulation, that maybe they were just young and trying to figure things out. But when they asked me to book the honeymoon flights, that little voice inside me, the one I'd ignored for years, whispered, "They're not asking because they need you. They're asking because they can." Marcus had called from work that day, his voice casual but rehearsed. "You got all those airline miles, right, Mama?" "A few. Why?" "We just thought, since you're good with travel stuff, maybe you could book the flights for us. We'll handle the hotel." I laughed. "Y'all trust me with your honeymoon?" "Of course, Mama. Who else would we trust?" Who else, indeed? I spent hours comparing flights, making sure they had the best seats, the smoothest connection, the perfect dates. When I sent Marcus the confirmation email, he wrote back a single line. "Got it, thanks. No heart, no love you, just business." Looking back now, I see how neatly it all fit. The distance, the coldness, the small, calculated favors. They'd built a system, and I was part of it. The dependable old woman who always said yes, the background character in their picture-perfect lives. But what they didn't understand, what nobody ever seems to understand, is that quiet people notice everything. I'd noticed how Jasmine's smile stiffened whenever I entered a room, how Marcus avoided my eyes when money came up, how their gratitude sounded rehearsed. I noticed, and I remembered. So when Marcus called me that morning and told me not to come, when he said it was a private honeymoon, I didn't just hear words. I heard the pattern behind them, the final step of their plan. Take what they could and then leave me behind. But God's funny sometimes, because that morning when I opened the folder and saw both tickets in my name, it felt like life itself had decided to intervene. I spent the rest of that day thinking about it. Not crying, not raging, just thinking. Thinking about how often we confuse love with loyalty. How we keep giving chances to people who wouldn't give us a seat at their table. How sometimes the only way to teach respect is to let consequences do the talking. By sunset, my mind was made up. I wasn't going to confront them over the phone. I wasn't going to cancel the tickets or demand an apology. I was going to let the truth speak for itself. At the airport, where everyone would see who really held the power, I poured myself a glass of iced tea, sat on the porch, and watched the sun sink low. The air was warm, soft, and full of endings. "You raised a good man," I whispered to the night. "Now let's see if he can find his way back." And for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long, long while. Not anger, not sadness, but peace. Sharp and solid as glass. Because the woman they thought was weak had just remembered exactly who she was. That evening, after dinner, I washed the dishes slower than usual. The house was quiet except for the hum of the old refrigerator and the crickets chirping outside my kitchen window. There was no TV, no gospel playing in the background, no phone buzzing for money. Just silence. The kind that's heavy enough to make you face your own thoughts. I dried my hands on a towel, walked to the dining table, and pulled the travel folder from my purse again. It was thick with printouts, flight confirmations, hotel bookings, a little notepad where I'd written the details. Marcus sent me. He'd said he wanted everything in one place so it's easier for us. I smiled bitterly at that memory. Everything in one place, indeed. And that place turned out to be mine. I took out the flight itinerary. The paper was still warm from the printer I'd used at the library earlier that week. Passenger 1, Evelyn Williams. Passenger 2, Evelyn Williams. Both tickets were mine. Same name, same confirmation number, same seat class. I blinked twice, half expecting it to change under the lamplight, but it didn't. It was all right there, plain as truth itself. I read the line again, slower this time, like I was savoring a verse from Scripture. "This is your sign, Evelyn." I reached for my glasses, perched them on my nose, and checked the booking email. Marcus's account wasn't even linked to it. He'd never logged in to change the details. The flight was non-transferable. That meant no substitutions, no corrections, no switching names. Only I could use those tickets. For years, I'd booked flights for patients, friends, even family reunions. I knew how the system worked. People thought names didn't matter much, but to the airline, a letter off your ID could keep you grounded. Marcus didn't know that, or maybe he didn't care enough to double-check. I picked up the phone and called the airline just to confirm what I already knew. A woman with a soft, tired voice answered. "Thank you for calling American Skyways. How may I assist you?" "Yes, baby," I said, keeping my tone polite. "I just want to verify a reservation. I booked 2 tickets to Aruba for next Tuesday, both in my name. I just need to confirm they're still valid." She typed something on her end. "Yes, ma'am. I see them right here. Departing from Houston, arriving in Aruba at 1:45 p.m. 2 passengers listed under Evelyn Williams. Non-transferable. You're all set." "Good," I said, letting a small smile creep into my voice. "Can I also confirm if anyone's tried to make changes to this reservation?" More typing. "No, ma'am. No recent activity. It's exactly as you booked it." I leaned back in my chair, my fingers tracing the rim of my coffee mug. "Perfect," I murmured. "Thank you kindly." When I hung up, I didn't jump or shout or laugh. I just sat there, letting the quiet victory settle in. The clock ticked softly, marking each second of realization. For years, Marcus and Jasmine had been one step ahead, planning, asking, taking. But not tonight. Tonight, the Lord himself had given me the upper hand, wrapped neatly in paper and print. I whispered to myself, maybe I'll just take the trip. The words floated into the air, gentle but steady. I almost didn't recognize my own voice. It sounded freer, lighter, like it belonged to a woman who had stopped asking permission to be happy. I looked around my living room. The framed photos of Marcus through the years, first day of school, high school graduation, college acceptance, all smiled back at me. The love in those pictures was real once, but somewhere along the line, it had turned into leverage. I stood up and walked to my bedroom. The suitcase sat in the corner, still half-packed from the morning. I'd meant to unpack after his call, to put everything back like none of it had happened. But now I opened it instead. Folded clothes waited inside. Linen pants, soft blouses, my sandals wrapped neatly in a towel. I smiled and began to add what was missing. Sunscreen, my Bible, and that wide-brimmed straw hat Robert bought me before he passed. "You'll need this someday," he'd said. Maybe he'd been right. I turned on the small radio on my nightstand. Etta James's voice filled the room, low and honey smooth. At last, my love has come along. I laughed quietly to myself. At last, indeed. For the first time in a long time, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not hurt, but purpose. I sat on the edge of my bed and started writing a list. Old habits die hard. Nurses like me love lists. To do: call bank in the morning. Make sure travel card is active. Print hotel confirmation. Take passport from safe. Tell nobody where I'm going. Each line steadied me. By the time I finished, my hand was trembling, not from fear, but from excitement. I looked toward the window. Outside, the sky had deepened into a soft velvet blue. The moon hung low, watching me through the curtains. "You've done enough for everyone else," I whispered to it. "Now it's your turn." My phone buzzed on the nightstand. Marcus again. I watched it ring once, twice, then stop. Another text followed. "Mom, we'll talk tomorrow. Don't be mad. We'll make it up to you. Make it up to me." 3 decades of sacrifices, and all he had to offer were those 5 words. I didn't reply. I placed the phone face down and took a deep breath. Somewhere between the quiet hum of the radio and the ticking clock, a thought bloomed fully in my chest. They had made their choice, and now I was making mine. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about payback. It was about reclaiming something I'd given away piece by piece. My dignity, my joy, my sense of self. When I turned off the lamp, the room went dark except for a sliver of moonlight cutting across the floor. I watched it stretch toward my suitcase, glinting faintly off the metal latch. "Looks like you and I are finally going somewhere," I whispered. I lay back on the bed, eyes open, heart steady. For years, I'd paid for everyone else's journeys. Tomorrow morning, I'd start my own. The next morning, the light coming through my curtains was gold and clean, the kind that feels like it's trying to wash everything old off the walls. I woke before the alarm, long before the world got noisy, and sat up in bed with that strange calm that comes right after a decision has settled deep inside you. I didn't have to rush. I didn't have to justify. I just had to act. I started with coffee. Not the cheap kind I'd been buying out of habit, but the dark roast I'd been saving for company. I ground the beans slow, breathing in the smell as the kitchen filled with it. Then I put on music, a little Mahalia Jackson, and let her voice fill every corner of the house. As the song played, I opened the suitcase on the table. Each item I laid inside was deliberate. My pale yellow sundress, the pearl earrings Robert gave me on our 5th anniversary, a pair of sandals I'd never worn because I kept telling myself my feet were too old for pretty things. "Not anymore," I whispered, dropping them in. I walked to the hall closet and reached for my passport, tucked in a small fireproof box with old photos and Robert's will. The photo on it was faded, but the woman staring back still looked ready for something. I ran my fingers over the picture and smiled. "You ready to see the world again, girl?" Outside, the birds were beginning to sing. It was going to be a bright day, the kind Jasmine might post about with the caption, "Feeling blessed." And maybe, for the first time in a while, I actually was. By 8 o'clock, I'd already called the bank, checked my balances, and made sure all my cards were active. The woman on the phone asked if I'd be traveling alone. "Yes, baby," I said, "but don't worry, I'm good company." She laughed. "That's what I like to hear." After that, I packed a small lunch. Old habits from nursing. Never travel on an empty stomach. I put together a turkey sandwich, an apple, and a little bottle of water. My movements were steady, sure. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't vengeful. I was peaceful. Before leaving, I sat at my dining table, where I'd written so many checks for Marcus over the years, and took out a pen. I started writing a short note, not to explain, just to leave clarity behind. "Marcus, I got your message. Don't worry about me. I'm not upset. You and Jasmine enjoy your privacy. I'll enjoy my trip. We all need to learn to stand on our own sometimes. Love, Mama." I folded it once, placed it on the counter under his old photo, and left it there. When I zipped up my purse and lifted the suitcase, it felt lighter than I expected. Maybe because, for once, I wasn't carrying anyone else's burdens inside it. I locked the door, walked down the porch steps, and took a deep breath. The morning air was warm with the smell of honeysuckle. I thought of Robert, how he used to say, "Evelyn, one day you'll stop saving everything for later." And I whispered back, "That day's today, baby." I climbed into my car, turned the key, and let the gospel station play me out of the driveway. The road ahead shimmered with sunlight, and I didn't feel 66 years old. I felt like a woman just beginning. The airport was already alive when I arrived, people dragging suitcases, the sound of rolling wheels echoing off the polished floors, that hum of excitement and exhaustion only airports have. I parked, grabbed my suitcase, and walked in slow, steady steps toward the check-in counter. For the first time in years, I wasn't nervous about flying. I wasn't waiting for anyone. I was exactly where I was supposed to be. As I stood in line, I saw them, Marcus and Jasmine, about 5 people ahead. My heart didn't race. It didn't even ache. It just watched. Jasmine was wearing white, too much of it for travel, and holding her phone like it was an extension of her hand. Marcus looked tense, checking his watch, glancing at the airline desk. They hadn't noticed me yet. The agent smiled at them politely. "Sir, may I have your passports, please?" Marcus handed them over, confident. Jasmine was scrolling through something, already dreaming about her cocktails in Aruba, I suppose. Then came the pause. The agent frowned slightly, typing. "I'm sorry, sir. There seems to be a problem." Marcus shifted his weight. "Problem?" "Yes," she said. "Both tickets are in the name Evelyn Williams. We can't check you in without the correct identification." I saw his confusion bloom into panic. He turned to Jasmine, whispering harshly. She stared at the screen like it had betrayed her personally. That's when I stepped forward, calm, slow, my heels clicking against the marble floor. "Excuse me," I said, smiling at the agent. "That's my reservation." The woman looked relieved. "Mrs. Williams, wonderful. We can get you checked in right away." Marcus spun around. His eyes went wide when he saw me. Standing there with my purse on one shoulder, passport in hand, and not a hint of apology on my face. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "Checking in for my flight," I said simply. "The one I booked." Jasmine tried to speak, but her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Marcus stepped closer, his voice low. "We were going to fix that, Mom. It was just a mistake." "Oh, I don't doubt it," I said softly. "But life's funny like that. Some mistakes can't be fixed, only learned from." The agent handed me my boarding pass. "Gate 14B, Mrs. Williams. Have a wonderful flight." "I intend to," I said, giving her the warmest smile I could muster. As I started to walk towards security, Marcus called after me, his voice breaking just a little. "Mom, you can't be serious. What are we supposed to do?" I stopped, turned halfway back, and met his eyes. "You said it yourself, baby. It's a private honeymoon. I'm just giving you what you wanted." Jasmine turned away, face red, muttering something under her breath. Marcus looked like a child again, small, helpless, suddenly aware of the cost of his own choices. I reached into my purse and pulled out a $20 bill, handed it to him with a soft smile. "Get yourself some breakfast. You'll need the energy to figure out the rest." Then I walked away. Every step toward that gate felt like shedding a skin I'd been trapped inside for too long. I could feel people watching, whispering maybe, but I didn't care. My boarding pass felt like freedom in paper form. When I sat down at the gate waiting to board, I glanced out the window at the planes lined up like silver birds under the sun. I whispered a quiet thank you, not to Marcus or even to God exactly, but to myself. Because after a lifetime of taking care of everyone else, I had finally taken care of me. When they called my boarding group, I stood up slow, letting the sound of the announcement sink in like a hymn I hadn't heard in years. Now boarding group 2 for flight 482 to Aruba. My hands trembled a little, but not from fear. It was something else. Anticipation, maybe. Or the weight of realizing that for once in my life, I wasn't waiting on anyone's permission to move forward. The flight attendant smiled at me as I handed her my boarding pass. "Have a wonderful flight, Mrs. Williams." "I already am," I said, stepping down the jet bridge. Inside, the cabin was cool and smelled faintly of coffee and new leather. I found my seat by the window, tucked my purse neatly beneath the one in front of me, and fastened my belt. As people shuffled past, I glanced at my reflection in the oval window. Silver curls, brown skin lined with stories, eyes that had seen too much but still sparkled. For the first time in decades, I liked what I saw. When the engines began to hum, I closed my eyes. The vibration was deep, steady, alive. Somewhere behind me, someone was complaining about legroom. Somewhere ahead, a baby cried softly. But I was still, grounded even as the plane began to rise. I thought of Marcus then. My boy standing helpless in that terminal, eyes wide, words caught behind his pride. A part of me wanted to feel sorry for him. Another part, the part that had held him when he was sick and cheered at his first paycheck, just felt tired. Not angry, not even disappointed, just done. "Maybe this is what letting go feels like," I whispered. I reached into my purse and pulled out the old photo I'd tucked between the tickets. Robert and me at the lake 40 years ago, sun in our eyes and laughter frozen in time. He was holding the camera at arm's length, saying, "Smile, woman. One day you'll want to remember this." I ran my thumb across his face. "You were right, baby. I do." The plane tilted, the clouds swallowing the ground below. Tiny houses, tiny cars, tiny versions of problems that once felt too big to carry. From up here, they all looked small, manageable. Maybe that's why people chase the sky. Because from this high, you can finally see what's worth holding on to and what's just noise. A flight attendant came by offering snacks. "Ginger ale or water, ma'am?" "Ginger ale, please, and one of those cookies." She smiled. "Traveling alone?" "Yes, ma'am," I said, cracking the cookie in half, and loving it. The woman across the aisle, maybe mid-50s, elegant with short auburn hair, leaned over slightly. "Good for you," she said. "Took me 58 years to learn how to do that myself." I smiled back. Guess it's never too late for either of us. We talked for a while. Her name was Diane, a retired teacher heading to meet friends for a reunion. She told me she'd lost her husband 2 years ago and that learning to be alone was the hardest class she'd ever taken. I told her I understood that better than most. By the time the plane leveled off, we were laughing like old friends. As I sipped my drink and watched the clouds roll by, something inside me settled. The bitterness, the hurt, the endless cycle of giving and being taken from. It all felt smaller now, like turbulence fading after takeoff. I whispered softly, "I spent 66 years flying other people's routes. This time, I'm the pilot. When the captain announced our descent, I looked out the window again. Below me, the sea was a brilliant turquoise, sunlight glinting off the water like scattered diamonds. I pressed my hand against the glass and smiled. Freedom didn't roar. It didn't scream. It whispered. And right then, it said my name. The moment we landed, my phone came alive, buzzing like a trapped bee in my purse. I ignored it until the plane taxied to a stop, then finally pulled it out. 12 missed calls, 8 messages, all from Marcus. The first one said, "Mom, please call me. We're stuck here. They won't let us change the tickets." The next, "This isn't funny. Jasmine's crying." Then, "We'll pay you back. Just help us fix this." And the last one, "I can't believe you did this." I turned the phone over in my hands, watching the screen light fade. The irony wasn't lost on me. After years of ignoring my calls, suddenly I was the one they needed to reach. I took a slow breath and slipped the phone back into my purse without replying. Not out of cruelty, out of peace. There was nothing to fix anymore. In the airport restroom, I freshened up, put on a bit of lipstick, and fixed my scarf. I caught my reflection in the mirror, still glowing from the flight, a softness returning to my face that had been gone too long. "Look at you," I said to the woman in the mirror, "glowing like you got your joy back." And maybe I did. Outside, the warm Caribbean air kissed my skin the moment the glass doors slid open. Palm trees swayed lazily in the breeze, and somewhere in the distance, a man played steel drums. The sound wrapped around me like sunlight turned into music. A driver held a sign that read, "E. Williams." I waved him over. "Mrs. Williams," he said with a grin, "welcome to Aruba." "Thank you, baby," I said, climbing into the van. "Feels good to finally be here." As we drove, I watched the landscape unfold, pastel houses, market stalls spilling with fruit, children laughing barefoot in the dust. The world felt wider, kinder. For once, I wasn't just a mother or a provider. I was a woman seeing something new. When I reached the resort, the receptionist greeted me with a practiced smile. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Williams. Welcome to Sand Harbor Resort. Honeymoon suite, correct?" I laughed, not bitterly, but with genuine amusement. "Yes, honey," I said. "It's my honeymoon, just me and my peace of mind." The staff laughed politely, and one young man carried my bag to the suite. When I stepped inside, I stopped cold. The room was beautiful. White linens, rose petals on the bed, a chilled bottle of champagne waiting on the table. Through the sliding doors, the ocean stretched out, blue and endless. I walked out onto the balcony, the wind tugging at my scarf, and looked at the horizon. For years, I'd dreamed of traveling somewhere like this, but there was always an excuse: bills, work, Marcus needing help. I'd postponed joy so many times, I'd forgotten what it felt like to claim it. Now, standing under that bright sun, it came rushing back. I poured a glass of champagne, took a slow sip, and let the bubbles dance on my tongue. Then I set the glass down and pulled my phone out again. Another message had come in. "You took our trip. Do you even care how this makes us look?" I smiled faintly and opened a new note instead of replying. My fingers moved slow, deliberate. "Dear Marcus, you've spent years teaching me how to give. Today you taught me how to stop. With love, Mama." I didn't send it. I just let it sit there, a quiet truth saved for me alone. Then I turned the phone off, placed it face down, and leaned back in the chair. The ocean roared softly below, endless and forgiving. As the sun dipped lower, I whispered, "You'll be fine, baby. It's time I was fine too." And for the first time in years, I believed it. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight spilling through white curtains and the sound of waves whispering against the shore. For a second, I didn't even remember where I was. Then I saw the ocean stretching out beyond the balcony, the blue so deep it looked like forever, and I smiled. I had slept the whole night without waking once. No dreams of bills or phone calls, no echo of Marcus's voice asking for something, just peace. I made coffee in the little pot by the minibar and took it out onto the balcony. The air was soft, salted, alive. Down below, I could see couples walking hand in hand on the sand, vendors setting up umbrellas, a little boy running with a kite. I let myself watch without envy. There was a time I'd have looked at that scene and felt lonely, but not now, not this version of me. I thought about all the mornings I'd spent waiting for a man to come home, for a son to call, for a life to get better. Waiting had been my full-time job for decades, but this morning, I didn't wait for anything. I just existed, and it was enough. After breakfast, I put on my yellow sundress and my sandals, the ones that made me feel young again, and walked down to the beach. The sand was warm under my feet. The sky so clear it felt painted. I carried a paperback I'd bought years ago but never opened, one of those someday books that always sat on my nightstand. A woman at the beach bar waved at me. "You look too elegant to be alone," she said with a laugh. I smiled. "Oh, baby, being alone's never stopped me from being elegant." Her name was Claudia, a retired school principal from Georgia traveling with her best friend, Rosa. They invited me to join them for lunch later, and I did. The three of us sat under a white umbrella, eating grilled fish and laughing about the silly things our children did when they were young. We talked like women who had carried too much and were finally allowed to set it down. At one point, Rosa said, "You're traveling solo? That's brave." I shrugged. "Not brave, honey. Just overdue." They both nodded in that way only women of a certain age can. The nod that says we understand without needing the details. Later that afternoon, I went for a walk along the shoreline, my feet sinking into the wet sand, the hem of my dress fluttering in the breeze. I found a piece of coral shaped like a heart and held it in my palm. It was small, imperfect, but beautiful. I decided I'd keep it, a little souvenir of the day I started over. As the sun began to lower, I sat on a rock and thought about Robert, about how he used to call me his steady star. I imagined what he'd say if he saw me now. Not broken, not bitter, just free. "You found your light again, Evie," he'd probably say. "Took you long enough." I laughed quietly to myself. That evening, I dressed in white and joined a small group from the resort for dinner by the beach. There was music, soft and slow, and when one of the staff offered his hand to dance, I surprised myself by saying yes. We swayed under the string lights, my bare feet sinking slightly into the sand, and for a moment, time folded. I was young again, alive again. The stars were out by the time I walked back to my suite. My phone sat on the nightstand, dark and silent. I didn't turn it on. Some silences are worth keeping. I stood by the window, looking out at the waves, and whispered, "Let them figure themselves out. My part's done." Then I poured myself another glass of champagne, toasted the horizon, and said, "To new beginnings, even when they come late." And for the first time in years, the world felt wide open. When I came home, a week later, the house felt both familiar and foreign, like walking back into an old photograph where you're no longer the same person who posed for it. The air smelled faintly of lavender and lemon cleaner, the way it always did when I wanted to feel calm. I set my suitcase down by the door, looked around, and smiled to myself. I had left as the mother who couldn't say no. I'd returned as the woman who finally had. I hadn't told Marcus I was coming home that day. I wanted a moment of peace before the storm I knew was waiting. But peace doesn't last long when guilt starts hunting for a target. It was near sunset when I heard a car door slam outside. I glanced through the window and saw Marcus's sedan in the driveway, Jasmine sitting in the passenger seat with her arms folded tight across her chest. Even from the window, I could tell her face was pinched, that kind of expression people wear when they're about to play victim. A second later, Marcus was pounding on the door. "Mom, open up!" I didn't rush. I took a sip of my tea, adjusted my cardigan, and only then turned the knob. He came in first, shoulders tight, voice raised. "You really went through with it? You actually took those tickets?" I tilted my head, keeping my voice soft. Afternoon, baby. You make it back from the airport, okay? Jasmine brushed past him, her perfume thick and sharp. Do you know how embarrassing that was? People were staring at us like we were scammers or something. I nodded. Well, I said, sometimes embarrassment's a teacher. Marcus rubbed the back of his neck, pacing. We had to pay for new tickets, Mom. It cost us almost $3,000. I had to put it on my credit card. I raised my eyebrows, feigning surprise. $3,000? Lord, that sounds familiar. Isn't that what I gave y'all for that new car? He stopped pacing, mouth opening, then closing again. The truth has a funny way of stealing people's words. I can't believe you'd do that to us, he muttered finally, quieter now. I sighed. To you? Baby, I didn't do anything to you. I did something for me. You just happened to learn something along the way. Jasmine rolled her eyes. You're being dramatic. You could have just called. You didn't have to humiliate us. I met her gaze, steady, unblinking. Sweetheart, you can't humiliate people who've already been lying to themselves. That shut her up. Marcus sat down at the table, rubbing his temples. Mom, we're family. You could have at least told me. Oh, family, I said softly, taking the chair across from him. Family's not about who gets to take advantage the longest, baby. It's about respect. And you forgot that somewhere between your rent payments and your wife's handbags. His jaw tightened. You think I don't appreciate what you've done? I think you stopped showing it, I said simply. And appreciation without action is just noise. He didn't answer right away. For the first time in years, he looked young again. Not in a sweet way, but in a lost way. A man who'd built his confidence on borrowed kindness. Finally, he said, So what now? You're cutting us off? I stirred my tea slowly. I'm setting boundaries, baby. Big difference. Jasmine scoffed. Same thing. I smiled, only to people who were never planning to respect them. Silence settled between us, heavy and uncomfortable. I let it stay. I'd spent too many years filling silences that weren't mine to fill. Finally, Marcus stood. I guess we'll just go. I nodded, rising too. That's probably best. He lingered a second longer at the door, eyes softening just enough to remind me of the boy he once was. You really didn't answer a single message, he said quietly. No, I said, shaking my head, because this time I wanted my actions to do the talking. He opened his mouth to reply, but Jasmine tugged his arm. Let's go. The screen door creaked and then slammed shut behind them. I stood there for a moment, listening to the sound of the car starting, tires crunching over the gravel. When the noise faded, I walked back to the kitchen and sat down at that same table, the one that had seen too many checks signed in someone else's name. The evening sun stretched long shadows across it. On the counter, the coral heart I'd found in Aruba lay next to my keys. I picked it up and rolled it between my fingers, feeling the smooth coolness against my skin. I thought of the ocean again, how it keeps moving, reshaping, forgiving without ever stopping. I smiled. You did good, girl, I whispered to myself. You finally stopped chasing storms. Then I reached for my notepad and started writing down what needed to come next. 1. Visit the bank. Remove Marcus from shared savings. 2. Change my will. 3. Book a weekend trip. Maybe New Orleans next. Each word I wrote felt like a brick laid in a new foundation. Outside, the first fireflies blinked in the yard, their small lights flickering like applause. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like somebody's mother first. I just felt like Evelyn Williams, a woman who finally came home to herself. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. The house was still, the kind of stillness that lets you hear the clock tick from 3 rooms away. For years, I'd wake up to somebody else's needs, Robert coughing, Marcus calling, work alarms buzzing before dawn. But that morning, there was no one to rush for, no one to rescue, just me. I made coffee and took it to the porch, watching the first streaks of orange slide across the sky. The world was quiet but full, a different kind of fullness than I'd ever known. I thought about Marcus and Jasmine. I knew they'd be angry for a while, probably telling their Friends some version of the story that made me sound cruel. But truth doesn't need defending. It just waits. When the sun climbed higher, I went inside, put on a neat blouse and my good slacks, and drove downtown to the bank. The young man at the counter greeted me with a bright smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Williams. How can we help you today?" I smiled back. "I'm here to clean house, baby." He looked a little confused but nodded politely. I sat down with a financial officer, a young woman named Marissa, and pulled out a folder full of old paperwork, joint accounts, savings certificates, insurance details. She flipped through them carefully. "Would you like to add or remove an authorized user from your accounts?" she asked. "Remove," I said. "My son. He's got his own life now." She glanced up, studying my face, probably expecting guilt or sadness. But there was none. Just peace. "All right, Mrs. Williams," she said softly. "We can handle that right now." As she typed, I looked around the small office. I'd been in that same building dozens of times, making deposits, signing loans, transferring money into Marcus's account because he was short just this month. But today felt different. Today, I wasn't there as a giver. I was there as a guardian of myself. When she finished, Marissa smiled. "All done. Would you like to review your beneficiaries too?" "Yes," I said. "It's time to make sure love is rewarded properly." It took an hour, maybe less. But when I walked out of that bank, the air felt lighter. I'd carried invisible chains for years, and I hadn't even realized how heavy they'd been until they were gone. My next stop was my lawyer's office. Mr. Franklin had been handling my affairs since Robert passed. He was kind, one of those old-fashioned gentlemen who still held doors open. When I told him I wanted to update my will, he looked at me with concern. "Everything all right, Evelyn?" "Everything's better than it's been in years," I said. He chuckled. "That's good to hear. So what changes are we making?" "I'm simplifying," I said. "Marcus will still get something, enough to remember me by, not enough to depend on. The rest goes to the community center. They're building a scholarship fund for nurses. Seems fitting." He nodded slowly, a smile tugging at his lips. "You've got a good heart." "I've got a wiser one now," I replied. By the time I left his office, the sun was high, the streets bustling. I stopped at a cafe for lunch, something I'd never done alone before. I sat by the window, ate a slice of pecan pie, and felt a quiet pride humming through me. A group of young women sat nearby, laughing, talking about their mothers. I caught a snippet. "My mom still calls me every day. Drives me crazy." Another one said, "Mine's too busy worrying about her garden." They laughed, and I smiled. I didn't envy them. I'd done my part in that chapter of life. I was the garden now, blooming, pruning, regrowing. When I got home, I opened the mailbox and found a letter. Marcus's handwriting, messy and impatient. I held it for a moment before opening it. "Mom, I know you think what you did was fair, but it wasn't. You left us stranded. Jasmine's still upset, and I don't even know how to talk to you right now. But I want you to know, I didn't mean to hurt you. I just thought you'd understand. I guess I was wrong. Marcus." I read it twice. No apology, not really. Just justification wrapped in regret. I folded it neatly and tucked it into a drawer. I didn't need to reply. Sometimes silence is the only answer that carries weight. That night I sat at the kitchen table with a candle burning low. The coral heart from Aruba sat beside it. I reached over, touched it gently, and whispered, "I finally see it, Robert. All those years you told me love has to have boundaries. I get it now." Outside, the cicadas hummed, and a warm breeze slipped through the window. I felt it on my face, soft, forgiving, free. I picked up my pen and wrote in my journal. Day 1 of my new season. I didn't lose my son. I found myself. And maybe one day when he learns the same lesson, he'll come home too. Not for money, not for help, but for love. Then I closed the book, blew out the candle, and went to bed, smiling. Not because everything was fixed, but because for the first time in my life, I no longer needed it to be. 2 weeks passed before I even realized I hadn't heard from Marcus again. The silence was steady now, no longer heavy, like a wound that had stopped bleeding. The house felt different too, lighter, cleaner, quieter, in a way that soothed instead of stung. Every sound, the kettle's whistle, the creak of the porch swing, reminded me that peace wasn't the absence of noise. It was the absence of demand. Each morning I walked to the park 3 blocks down, coffee in hand, greeting the same people I used to rush past. There was an old couple who fed the ducks, a young mother pushing a stroller, a man selling sweet tea from a cooler. I started sitting on the same bench every morning, watching the light move through the trees. Sometimes I brought my journal, sometimes I didn't. Sometimes I just breathed. One afternoon I pulled out my phone to check the weather and noticed an unread message. Another from Marcus. It was shorter this time. "Hey Mom, hope you're okay. I've been thinking about what you said. Maybe we both needed that lesson." I stared at it for a while, the words sitting on the screen like a hesitant olive branch. I didn't cry. I didn't rush to respond. Instead, I smiled softly and whispered, "Good. That's the start." Then I set the phone down and let the wind carry the rest. That evening, I cooked a small dinner. Roasted chicken, greens, and cornbread. Enough for one, but plated like company was coming. I ate slowly, savoring the food, the quiet, the rhythm of my own breathing. Afterward, I cleaned the kitchen, lit a candle, and opened my journal. Day 14 of freedom. It's strange how easy joy feels when it's no longer borrowed. I used to think my life was over once Marcus stopped needing me. Now I see. That's when it finally began. I closed the book, leaned back, and listened to the rain tapping against the window. It wasn't a storm, just a gentle, rhythmic kind of rain that makes everything smell like new beginnings. The coral heart from Aruba still sat on my windowsill, its pale surface glowing in the candlelight. I reached for it, feeling the ridges and smooth edges under my thumb. That piece of coral had once been part of something bigger, broken, reshaped, and still beautiful. I laughed softly. Guess we've both been through some waves. The phone buzzed again. Not Marcus this time, but Claudia from the resort. "You still planning that next trip, Miss Evelyn?" I grinned and typed back, "Already looking at tickets, baby. Maybe Paris this time." When I set the phone down, I felt Robert beside me. Not as a ghost, but as a presence, like memory turned to warmth. "You'd be proud of me," I said quietly. I finally stopped living small. Outside, the rain slowed to a drizzle. I stepped onto the porch and watched the last drops fall from the eaves. The night smelled like wet earth and possibility. I thought of all the women like me, the ones who gave and gave until they disappeared behind the people they loved. If I could tell them one thing, it would be this. You are not done just because they stopped asking for you. You are allowed to begin again, even if the world forgot to tell you how. I stood there a long time, feeling the cool air brush against my face. Somewhere down the street, a car passed, music drifting faintly behind it. I smiled, turned off the porch light, and whispered to myself the last line I would write in my journal that night. For years, I booked trips for others. Now every destination begins with my name. And with that, I went to bed. Not as someone's mother, not as someone's provider, but as a woman finally traveling toward herself.